You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 289. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, author of How to Get On Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share the stories and life lessons of changemakers and authors with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today I have something fun, something new. I am joined by my co-host, Stephanie Hockersmith, aka Pie Lady Books, and we are interviewing Stephanie Wrobel, who is the author of The Hitchcock Hotel. Now, Steph and I are huge Hitchcock fans, so getting this opportunity was such a blast for both of us. We both read the book. Steph did an amazing pie, which is how I found out about Hitchcock Hotel. And so we're diving into all things Hitchcock, and we're also talking about the person he was, right? But the creative genius that he also is. So this was such a fun conversation. I know you are going to love it too. Hi, Steph and Stephanie. This is going to be an interesting one. Do you both go by Steph or?
I do, but you can call me whatever. Yeah. Pick which one you want to call us.
Well, I'm excited. Well, we're interviewing Stephanie Wrobel, author of The Hitchcock Hotel. So Steph and Stephanie, and I'm so excited because Steph and I are huge Hitchcock fans. So we can't wait to pick your brain. Before we dive in, can you introduce yourself, Stephanie, please?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. So I'm Stephanie. I'm the author of 3 suspense novels, most recently The Hitchcock Hotel, which I assume is what we'll be talking about here today, but happy to talk about the other ones too, if you want.
No, I'm stoked about it. And the reason I picked up the book was because Steph did your pie. And I was like, a Hitchcock book? Yes, please. Because we here in this family, we are TCM lovers. So we watch Noir Alley every Saturday night. That is our thing with Eddie Muller. My husband's gotten to meet him. He needs to come on the show. And we love our Hitchcocks. So this was the book I thoroughly enjoyed. How you had every kind of movie, like if you're a Hitchcock fan, then you will enjoy this book because you brought in all of these different elements of it while also creating your own Hitchcock kind of story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was a really fun challenge. I'm not going to pretend like I was the biggest Hitchcock fan beforehand.
You weren't. That I'm so interested.
I mean, I had seen a few of his movies, but just to be like totally straight, I was not like a diehard fan. I actually wrote the book.
I would never have known.
Yeah, I wrote the book as an excuse to do a really deep dive into his filmography.
I love that.
Like in the story, I had taken a couple film studies classes in college, and there I watched North by Northwest. So that was the first Hitchcock film I saw, which was great. But like for me, it's not the espionage stuff. It's the psychological thrillers. Like those are the ones that really speak to me. So anyways, I was trying to come up with this third book idea, and I had always wanted to do a deep dive into Hitchcock. But there's so many movies, so many books coming out every year that going back into like the archives, as it were, to the classics sometimes falls by the wayside. So, I pitched this book to my editors, and I was thrilled when they approved it because I was like, yes, now I get to watch movies in the middle of the day and call it work.
That's awesome.
So,
I love the hotel aspect because that was very Psycho. And of course, after I read the book and I listened to the book, I did both.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I didn't read the full thing. I like half listened, half read, but Psycho was then on. And then we watched Suspicion because Hitchcock is always on. So I was like, oh, this is so good.
It's so good.
Yeah, it takes a lot. It takes inspiration from a lot of Hitchcock movies, as I'm sure you picked up on, but Psycho is definitely probably the primary if I had to pick, just because the structure mirrors it very closely. I was really interested in this idea of a genre switch halfway through. So for those who maybe aren't as big of Hitchcock fans, you know, Psycho it starts out as a crime caper, and then with a murder, it turns into a psychological thriller. So I wanted to do something similar, but mine turns into a psychological thriller and then becomes a whodunit with the murder halfway through.
I was going to say that I was actually looking for that quote where you were talking about, Hitchcock talks about the difference between suspense and what did he say? I was like, surprise. Thank you. And I love that. I've always loved that quote. And of course I should have written it down before we chatted, but I loved how you did such a great blend of like the suspense aspect of all the Hitchcock, you know, like kind of, you're not sure, is someone going to die? Like, you know, is it like what is planned? You know, you've got all this, and then you've got the whodunit, like thriller aspect. And so I love that it was kind of that duality. It was so fun because it was like, it felt like you're leading in as Hitchcock and then it turns into you. And then it like ended with this bang as you. And I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was.
We won't share how it ended.
No, we won't. No spoilers here.
No spoilers. But I mean, it's so good.
It was kind of interesting because I know, like, from my research, that Hitchcock was not a huge fan of whodunits.
Yeah.
He only made like 2 in his 53 films. And so I was like, I hope he wouldn't mind me putting his name on a book that turns into a whodunit. But yeah, I think the first half is more about, to your point about like suspense versus surprise. The first half is more suspense, and then I think the second half is more like surprise. So
agreed.
I tried to get both.
I loved that. You did, and you nailed it. And I loved also that, you know, as a Hitchcock fan, we also can't ignore the problematic, you know, aspects of like his personality and who he was. So I love that you brought like just kind of the full bodied like Hitchcock experience, like with the quotes from, you know, throughout. Like I love like the black pages that have the quotes on them that talk about like who Hitchcock was. And then even the characters bringing in like, well, Hitchcock was actually kind of a problem in these areas toward women. Doesn't take away from his genius and like just what an amazing, you know, I mean, he defined the genre in so many incredible ways, but I love that you gave us like a full bodied experience. So I'm saying that to echo what you said about, I hope he doesn't mind me putting his name on a whodunit. And I'm like, you know, I think he can handle it. I think you did him justice, but also made it like really, I'm trying to say this without giving anything away, really satisfying as a woman, especially, and just reading the book. I just thought it was really
Thank you.
Good.
For those who don't know, Tippi Hedren and a few other actresses that Hitchcock worked with accused him of sexual assault, and there was never any consequences for that. As we're finally only now in this generation coming to consequences for powerful men in Hollywood. And so, that was something that I did not know about him when I pitched the idea. And then as I got into research about his background, I was like, oh God, like it really kind of, it was a thorny thing for me because I was like, I don't want to be seen putting this guy on a pedestal. I mean, his name is literally in the title of my book. And I wasn't sure kind of how to square those two things of admiring the art that he created, but kind of not that, like, you know, obviously not feeling great about who he sometimes was as a person. And so I did try to have kind of both. Of course, there's more than 2 perspectives, but I kind of tried to represent 2 perspectives. One is Alfred, who's just like, it's just about the art. Who cares? Like the artist is irrelevant here. And then we've got Zoe, who's like, you can't take the art, the artist is the art, you know, you can't separate those things. And I don't arrive at a conclusion at the end. I think for me, like, and for all of us probably, there's probably some absolutists who would just say, no, that's it. I'm never watching or reading or whatever someone's work like that's done these horrible things again. But for me, I think I say this in the book, but it's kind of, I think we all take it on a case by case basis, right? Like if it's an artist who are just kind of like, yeah, their work doesn't really speak to us, then it's easy for us to be like, well, I'm never taking in his work again. But when it's someone that you really like, and even in the book, you know, Zoe is a big Michael Jackson fan. And so Alfred kind of turns it on her and is like, oh, so you haven't been listening to, you know, Michael Jackson's music in the last, you know, couple years. And so, I think it's whose art do we love enough that we're kind of like willing to make ourselves hypocrites for. And also, like, I just think that's such an interesting idea of like, can we separate the art from the artist? And I always at this point refer people to this book by Claire Dederer called Monster. It's like a book of essays And it's about this exact thing of like, how do we reconcile our love of art with these men almost always who have done these monstrous things. So if anybody wants to read more about that topic, certainly that's like, this is not the theme of my book. I tried to touch on it. But yeah, if you want a really like good deep dive, like very thought provoking, very cerebral, I would recommend that book.
I love that you bring this up because it is something that I think even as I come on and I go, oh, I'm a Hitchcock fan and Steph's a Hitchcock fan and we're Hitchcock fans. And yet we know what he's done as well. You know, there's been movies about it, documentaries. So it's a really great point, especially in the environment that we're in right now of who are we stop listening to? Who are we boycotting? What are we doing? Where is that line? And like you said, how willing are we to be a hypocrite in this?
I think also there's the element of no human being is good or bad, right? Like we all are this dichotomy of, you know, the darker parts of ourselves and the better parts of ourselves. And you're kind of like waging this war. And I think throughout life, we do make those decisions based on a case-by-case basis, based on our personalities. For me personally, I think it's easier with Hitchcock because I've always thought of him as a creep, like, because like he has a creepy vibe, right? So like, there's nothing about him that I'm not going to pull an Alfred and be like, I'm going to devote my life to you, you know? Do I enjoy watching his movies? Yes. Can I acknowledge that he is a master of suspense? I mean, he defined the genre, I mean, created these masterpieces and, you know, used a lot of Jimmy Stewart, which I will never feel upset about. And I, you know, he was a genius on that level, but then also like, would I want to hang out with him for dinner? Like, no, I wouldn't, you know? And so I get that it is hard because, you know, you don't want to put money towards something you don't agree with. And I think that does need to be a case by case basis. But I think, you know, I think there's so many untold stories, especially in Hollywood in that era, and just, you know, of powerful men. You know, I think I heard a story about Gene Kelly, like bullying, how did I forget her name? Princess Leia's mom, from Singing in the Rain. What's her name? Anyway, his co-star in Singing in the Rain.
I know who you're talking about. I see her in my face right now.
I'm blanking on. Okay, so anyway, Debbie Reynolds. Okay, he like bullied her. He was apparently really mean to her about trying to learn this really difficult dance number that they did that when they were doing that Good Morning number, I think, and he was like this, you know, world-class dancer. She was kind of newer, and I think he was really mean about it. And Fred Astaire, this is all rumor, this is what I've heard, but that Fred Astaire actually came and like helped her learn the routine because she was so overwhelmed. Anyway, so you hear these stories, you know, and there, I think there was a lot that we could pull out from, especially the golden age of Hollywood, if you will, that, you know, victimized women in a lot of ways. And obviously like Hitchcock had a type, you know, he liked them blonde. He, you know, was, I think borderline cruel, not borderline, you know, to Tippy during the filming of Birds, you know, and then he had kind of his power corrupts. Right. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that while also acknowledging like, hey, he defined the world in this specific way. And as a thriller lover, like, I think you don't ever expect the characters in the book to be like amazing people. You kind of expect them to be messed up and like twisted. So then you basing a book off a man who basically devoted his life to loving Alfred Hitchcock. Like, I didn't expect Alfred to be like, and I'm not going to give anything away about who he actually ended up being, but like going into it, I was like, I wasn't expecting Alfred to be like a man I'd want to marry, you know, like I didn't expect him to be like, you know, this, you know, because you're kind of like, okay, like I definitely recognize the love of the art, but you know, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think you kind of go into it with knowing the genre, like, I kind of expect you to be a little messed up.
There's you know, what you said about nobody's all good or bad. And another thing I learned from my research about Hitchcock was he actually he employed a lot of women in his, like he put women in positions around like off screen and on screen that was not available to them at the time. You know, there were a lot of editors, script readers, assistants, whatever. Presumably he wasn't harassing all of them, we hope. And then as well, a lot of the female roles on screen, you know, roles like Kim Novak had in Vertigo were not necessarily like these deep, meaty roles were not really necessarily available to women at that point. So it's an interesting dichotomy there, right? Like on one hand, some people he was sexually harassing, and on the other hand, he also helped women get ahead in Hollywood, both on and off screen. And by all accounts was a very, devoted father. So it is just kind of interesting it's easy to just completely write someone up and say they were despicable always, but it's always been more interesting to me in all of my books to examine the gray, right? Because I think in today's culture, everything is so black and white. You're either terrible or you're amazing, and there's no room for in between. But the reality is 99.9% of people are somewhere in between. Sometimes we're terrible, sometimes we're amazing. And most of the time we're just like trying to get by,
Yeah.
So I think, that just keeping that in mind, regardless of who the person is always going to create more interesting fiction.
Right. Oh, I agree. And like, I'm sorry, I'm talking so much. And what drives people to become someone they never thought they'd be, and I love you examine that a lot, just as with the psychological aspect of your books. That's always one of the things I love most about a psychological thriller, especially, is just breaking down like how a person can become this or this, a side of them you never expected, and I think it's fascinating study, because I think at the end of the day, like, we're all capable of things we could never imagine, if we're pushed to the right limit, so.
Yeah, that's my main pet peeve with readers is the unlikable character complaint, because, I'm like, at some point in your life, you have been an unlikable character. Some of us more than others.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, you are, after all, reading a thriller. And in order for, the only way to not have an unlikable character as like a narrator, protagonist, whatever, is to kind of adopt this point of view of like the police officer or the journalist, somebody who's a little bit more removed from the situation. But that, for me, I mean, those are great books. Those have never been the books that interested me, because what I like to get into is, why do people make decisions that differ from the vast majority of society? How could in the first case of my first book, like, how could a woman possibly make her child ill, like she's, medically abusing her? Or how could someone join a cult? How could someone lead a cult in the second one? So for me, like that, I mean, those require horrible deeds, and that means the characters are going to be unlikable a lot of the time. You know what I mean? But again, I think like one of the most fun tricks or challenges as a writer is to try to make you not like the character, but at some points to like empathize with where they were coming from.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that's it's really powerful when you can do that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's just, I don't know, I've always been really interested in psychology. I'm always really interested in people who are kind of societal outliers, just like aren't making decisions like the rest of us do. It's not as interesting to me to write somebody who I would be friends with. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that there's no like interesting psychology there. So I'm always like, it's always a character like Alfred, like Danny, like Grace. Like, these are the characters that really light me up, because they're weird, or they're bad. They don't do things like the rest of us. Like, as somebody who's typically a rule follower and was like so much a goody two shoes growing up, it's fun to step into, someone's shoes who's less concerned with all of that.
That was going to be my question, is what was your journey like for you to get to this place? Because I'm looking at you and I'm like, oh, you look very nice. And like, you could be my neighbor and we'd be friends. And you're like, I'm going to write about murder and cults. And
yeah, I get that question a lot. And I'm always, it's interesting because obviously I only live inside my own brain. And I'm like, oh, like, is this not what other people think about throughout the day as well? I can't really, I had a very normal childhood. It was funny when the first book came out, my mom was like, you need to tell everyone that you had a very positive
I didn't do this to you.
Yeah, she's like, no one needs to think that this has anything to do with us. So yeah, I was going around clarifying that. But yeah, pretty boring, happy childhood, which I think is why, I needed to write fiction. When I see all these people writing memoirs and stuff, I'm like, man, my memoir would be such a snooze fest. I've been very blessed in that way. But yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, I think, why are so many readers interested in reading true crime or thrillers or whatever? I think it's kind of cut from the same cloth. It's just this idea of, well, I guess we all have our different reasons of getting into it. You know, I think some people theorize that it's like, oh, like as women, like how would we get away from that or outsmart that? For me, I don't think it's like so much that. For me, it just like, it really comes back to, I'm just really interested in people's motivations and why they make the decisions that they do. You know, like there's on a less evil level, you know, even, you know, when you're in public, like let's just say in a grocery store or a plane or a bank and someone's like kind of making a stink or like somebody's snappy or, you know, my instinct or like my inclination is to look at that person and be like, why? You know what I mean? Like, are they, if I'm feeling generous, it's like, maybe they just got bad news. Maybe they're having a bad day. Like, and my less generous or more diabolical days, I'm like, ooh, like what, you know, what skeletons are in their closet? So it's just like, why do people tick? And I think that like really lights up for me when it's people who have made like, I mean, like the worst of decisions that you've made or actions you've taken out, the more I'm like, how, why, you know, like let's take it really far, like a serial killer. It's just like the idea that you could like, I'm not saying I would obviously ever murder someone, but like a crime of passion where it's like, I got in a disagreement with my spouse and did something I didn't mean to. Like on some level, you're like, okay, we've all been angry at our spouses. We've all gotten in fights. Most of us have not picked up a kitchen knife and stabbed them, but then you get to people who are just like doing this for fun, you know, who don't even know the victims. And it's mind boggling to me. And so I suppose all of my writing is an effort to sort of try to understand those people. In some cases, maybe impossible, but it's just, it just has always been something that fascinates me.
And when did you start writing? When did you did you come out of high school, college and go, oh, I want to be an author. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on thrillers and all of this, or what was there some pivot along the way? What did your career journey look like?
Yeah, so I was definitely too much of a practical Midwesterner to come out of high school or college believing that this was a viable career path. I always enjoyed writing and I really lit up and, you know, I would just like kind of write these stories on the side when I was like a teenager, I suppose, less so in college. I think even by college, I was kind of like, I wouldn't even major in English, though I would have loved to because I was like, that's not practical. I'm not going to get a job. So I like did the next closest thing, which was like a PR major. And I ended up working in advertising for like 7 or 8 years as a copywriter. So I was writing a lot of TV spots and radio ads, billboards, whatever. So for me, that was the closest I could think of to get to creative writing, but still have like a salary. Because I was like, no one supports themselves as an author. Like, surely not. So I did that for a while. And then I actually moved to London in, I don't know, 2014, I think it was, for my then fiance, now husband, to go to business school. And it was during that time that, you know, the advertising industry is really competitive there. I had a really hard time finding like a full-time job. So I was doing a lot of freelancing and I was spending a lot of time between freelance gigs. And so during these periods of unemployment, I finally, you know, I had been toying with the idea of an MFA in fiction writing because I had never taken a creative writing class up to this point. I mean, freshman year of high school, I like took one, but it was just like an elective, whatever kind of thing. And so I, as you may be gathering, am someone who does really well with structure and a plan, and I'm very type A. And I was like, I feel like if I went to like a 2-year program, I could really learn a lot and I could maybe come out of this with a novel. So I said, you know, what the hell? I'm unemployed. My career is not exactly flourishing. If I'm going to pivot, like now's the time. And so, yeah, in 2016, moved back to the States, moved to Boston, went to this MFA program. And I had to push to get my thesis, to be allowed to write an entire novel as my thesis, which that thesis ended up becoming Darling Rose Gold.
That's amazing.
That's and I've been writing ever since. So yeah, I try to like caution aspiring writers, like it usually does not work out that way. Darling Rose Gold is the first novel I have ever written all the way through to the end. And I do credit, you know, my professors, my thesis chair and reader who really worked with me and my peers as well. Like I was workshopping that novel for probably a year. And then also like, of course, myself, I just like, I knew what I wanted coming out of that program. Most of my peers were probably like 5 to 10 years younger than me. A lot of them came straight out of undergrad, whereas I had been in the workforce for almost a decade. And so I just like, I knew what I wanted, right? Like I was like, I have these 2 years. I want to come out of this with a novel. Best case scenario, I get an agent. Worst case scenario, I get a graduate degree. But I like absolutely did not think like, well, this will be my first novel. Like I get questions in interviews pretty regularly with like, why'd you decide to launch your career with a book about Munchausen by proxy? And I'm like, oh, you think it was like that strategically planned? I was just thrilled when my thesis chair was like, you know what? I think you might be able to, I think this might be okay, like good enough to get an agent. I think you should reach out. And I was like, what?
Oh, that's awesome.
That's funny. That would be a question.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's like, you're misunderstanding completely how a writing career works. You just like throw stuff at the wall until something sticks. And then you're like, oh my God, it's like, it's gone from all you get is rejection, rejection, rejection. And then like something flips and it's like, oh my God, you know, and like, and that was the thing that flipped it for me. So
I love that.
Do you think you'll always stick with thrillers, psychological things like this genre, or do you have any itch to do something else?
I definitely have an itch to do something else. I'm calling it expansion, like expanding beyond versus just a total pivot, because I do think there's like always a place for suspense in my heart. But yeah, I really want to get into more speculative fiction, you know, like Handmaid's Tale, like The Power, books that are like kind of set in our world, not super sci-fi, but just like there's something very different, you know, in whatever aspect there may be. So there's an idea I've been toying around with that I'm hopefully starting to work on soon. But there will always be a psychological element for sure. I think even there, and I'm sure there will be darkness regardless, you know, like you could take the writer out of the genre, but you can't take the genre out of the writer sort of thing. So I think readers will like still get that kind of common thread of more unlikable characters probably.
I love that you have a darkness because you're so light. Like you're just a nice, like sunshiny person. Like I feel, you know, I don't look at you going, oh,
yeah, I've heard, when I first got into the industry and was like taking meetings with a few different editors, I heard from more than one. They said that thriller writers tend to be like very sunny and like, you know, whatever, like you just said, but like it's the romance writers that you have to watch out for.
You have to watch out for.
Interesting.
Ooh, interesting.
Maybe we get all of our dark stuff out on the page and then we're just like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I don't know.
I love that. I love that. So you are working on something next.
So I'm working on my fourth novel, which is another psychological thriller. And yeah, just got feedback on the first draft of that, which was pretty positive actually for me. Usually my first drafts are just like all over the place and require another, you know, 3 to 6 months of work. But this was probably like the best feedback on a first draft that I've gotten. So I'm really excited. That book should hopefully come out fall 2026.
Ooh, I'm excited. That'll be awesome.
It's about the publishing industry. So maybe, you know,
that'll be,
maybe it's just because it's a lived experience of mine. So, you know, I didn't have as much research to do.
Yeah. Is it hard to come up with like your next idea? Like, is that something that or do you kind of always have ideas floating around in your head for like what you want to do next?
Now I always have ideas. So I use a website called Padlet, which is basically just like a digital corkboard. And I just keep like a bunch of Post-it notes of ideas, essentially digitally. When I first started out, you know, when I was writing like books 2 and even 3, I suppose, I was a little more like, oh my God, like my next idea. But I think, you know, because it takes so long to write a novel, you just like naturally, if you're kind of like curious about the world and reading things here and there, like ideas just, the more you do it, I think the more ideas keep popping into your head. So for me, actually the problem is the opposite, where I just feel like I don't have enough time to write everything that I want to write. You know, like there's at least another 3 or 4 ideas that I could like really get, you know, obsessed with like right now. And for me, like the struggle is always not indulging those, because the new shiny thing that I haven't yet tainted by actually committing to paper is always like so much more enticing than the one that I'm like currently slogging through, you know, like, an idea always feels perfect until you commit to it and you start writing it. And then your own shortcomings as a writer start coming through, and you're like, oh, I thought somehow magically this book, my prose would completely change and become like lyrical, and you know what I mean? So, there's always more exciting ideas to be worked on, which is great, because I think I can still remember kind of like baby writer stuff, being like, oh God, like what if I only had like 2 ideas, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just like not really a fear anymore. Now it's more just having the time and like the mental energy to do it, because like for me at least, you know, after 4 or 5 hours of a writing day, you kind of just crap out, and it's like I could keep going on different stuff, but it's not going to be quality. And then the other thing is just like, can I convince the powers that be in publishing to like get on board with some of these ideas? You know, like that's what I've realized is more of the trick is some of these ideas, you know, what most publishers want is this really high concept, catchy idea that you can pitch in a sentence and people light up and go, ooh, but like a lot of my favorite books are not like that, you know, like if you pitch like Demon Copperhead, and just as like a random example in one sentence, like I don't think you would necessarily be like, ooh, like that, I must read that. But that was like my favorite book that I've read in like the last few years. And so it's basically like, what package can I put together to sort of like trick people into letting me write the books that I want to write?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's
is
working.
It ever? Oh yeah, absolutely. Is it ever hard? Like, I was going to ask, what is your preferred genre to read? And is it ever hard to read like psychological thrillers and then like struggle with worrying, you know, about keeping them separate from like the work you're working on, you know, is that ever hard or?
I don't think so. So I used to like pre-author career, and maybe at the beginning of my career, I did read like mostly psychological thrillers, but I still enjoy them, but like not as much, because I've read so many that it's not even about like necessarily that they're like formulaic, but I think it's just, I kind of like can see behind the curtain too much a lot of the times, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I do read them, I prefer something that's like a little more literary of a thriller, where it's like I can't predict as easily where it's going.
Yes.
But I like to read pretty widely genre-wise. I mean, I do, you know, it's nice to get some literary fiction in there, or just contemporary general fiction. I'm reading a lot of speculative fiction because that's just a genre that I love. But yeah, I think to have your influence as a writer, you want to just like read the best quality stuff that you can that's still interesting to you. So there's a ton of classics that I probably should have read as a writer, but then like I go to read them, like some of these Russian writers, and you're just like, you know, so it's like kind of trying to bridge that gap of like, you want to keep that love of reading, but like also the better of writers that you read, like hopefully through osmosis that like comes in a bit into your own writing. So yeah, I don't try to be super prescriptive about my own reading. It's just like honestly what interests me as a reader. And I think that hopefully will translate into the writing as well. I don't think my reading interests are so different from like an average reader's interests. And I kind of assume that as a writer as well, you know, like it seems like the things that kind of keep me up at night or interest me also keep a lot of readers up at night. So I just kind of like let my natural interests go where they go, and assume like there's going to be other weirdos like me who want to like read about cults, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, because we're not in them. So
yeah, exactly.
At least the three of us aren't here.
Steph's like, I gotta go.
Yeah. Like, great. That wrapped up that one.
Yeah.
Stephanie, where can everybody find you, pick up Hitchcock Hotel and your other books?
So you can find me on Instagram at Stephanie Wrobel, or my website is stephaniewrobel.com. And then you can buy my books anywhere books are sold.
You are a delight.
You are a delight. And can I just say,
eerie as the books are.
Oh my gosh. Can I just say though, this book is so fun. Like, it's also just a really fun read. You know, whether if you love Hitchcock or you've grown up with Hitchcock, you know, will see things that make it even more fun. But it's just a fun whodunit with these people. You know, I mean, I think the locked room thing is always really fun, and you did it really well. And with all of these questions about like, are they really stuck there? Who's doing this? Like, what's going on? You know, and just the kind of the dark academia aspect as well, like this house sitting above like the, you know, university they went to. I just loved the whole vibe. Like, it was just such a fun, like thrilling read. It was one of those that I started listening to it and I just didn't stop because it was just so much fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this was a bit of a deviation from my previous books, which are, I think, a bit more serious. This one, you know, Hitchcock used to say other directors' movies were a slice of life and his are a slice of cake. And I just kind of tried to embody that and just make, I mean, I had never written a whodunit. And so, yeah, this was just like pure fun, like pure froth.
Well, you nailed it. I mean, as someone who like basically exists on whodunits and thrillers and all those things, you nailed it. It was so fun. It was unexpected, and there were so many different layers of things going on. And I'm a big believer. I never look for like a twist in a thriller or mystery, even a whodunit, because I'd rather have a well-written story than like a shocking twist, right? Like I would rather have, but you brought all of it to the table, and it was just a really fun read. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming, honestly. Okay. It was so good. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a blast.
Thank you for letting me crash as well. It's so good to talk to you.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you for having me. Glad I got to be here on the inaugural show.
Okay, whether or not you're a Hitchcock fan, you are going to love the Hitchcock Hotel. If you love thrillers, if you love a whodunit, but if you do love Hitchcock, there's some elements throughout the book that are going to make you want to go and watch all of your favorite Hitchcocks. If you love Rope, if you love Vertigo, if you love Psycho, all of these are included in the book aspect. And how much fun was it to talk to Stephanie, who is so sweet and I want to say innocent like looking, right? Because she's so kind. You wouldn't think that she's writing a murder thriller, whodunit, all of these things. So it was such a blast to get to talk to her, to learn about her, and then to have Steph join me. We're going to do more of these. So I can't wait to share them with you. Go pick up a book, pick up the Hitchcock Hotel, find that escape, and just enjoy your time reading a great book because we need them.